So, my next guest speaker is Ryzek Lutzk. Is a sociologist and he is known for his research on Baloch society, language and culture. I request him to please present your paper.
Mani granin dostan ijazat dait ki shavati nemaga vati duao salam dem dain be konferenza man bas vashun ki konferenz jurbuta au pamman iftikhar jagin kimna ham be konferenza lochitant. Thank you for organizing this conference. I have two aims in my presentation today. At first, I'd like to give you some information about the Baloch in Afghanistan who are not represented by themselves at this conference, but you should always know that I'm not a representative of them. I'm just a person who visited them several times and who has some information about what's going on in Afghanistan and among the Baloch in Afghanistan today. And secondly, I would like to talk to you about the question of identity, which was mentioned yesterday more than once. What is the basis of identity? Is it language? You can see that today I wear Balochi dress because in some parts of Balochistan, I mean Western Balochistan, it is sufficient to wear this dress to be known as a Baloch. It even may be dangerous to wear this dress. So these are the two main points, Baloch in Afghanistan and the question of identity. My presentation is divided into 4 parts. I will give a short historical overview about the situation of the Baloch in Afghanistan. Then I'd like to give you some information about Baloch settlements in Afghanistan. Then comes the part which concerns identity. I call it the diversity of identity, concepts of being Baloch. And in the 4th part, I will give you some information about recent political development among the Baloch in Afghanistan. So let's start. The situation of the Baloch is different in every country where they reside in their divided Balochistan, and in Afghanistan the situation was different in different periods of history. So if we start with the so-called Mohammed Daoud era, this is the 1970s, the Republican era. At that time, Afghanistan had a policy of national unity. It was even forbidden to have a name like Baloch or Pamiri or a tribal name. That was forbidden. So Afghanistan was to go a Jacobean way of national unity. The French example was taken at that time. After the so-called Sour Revolution, the communist coup d'etat, in 1978, the situation changed rapidly. At that time, the communists understood very soon that they had to recognize each person's identity. And at that time, ethnic identity was seen as linguistic identity, first of all. So it was the Soviet example which was taken in Afghanistan, and some politicians at that time even thought about a national delimitation of Afghanistan according to ethnic borders, as it was done in Soviet Central Asia in 1924, when Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and so on were created. The first importance was given to the language, and that meant that in Afghanistan there were 2 official languages. They were never called national languages, but official languages, which were Dari and Pashto, and 5 languages of national minorities were given the status of so-called national languages. This was Uzbek, Turkmen, Nuristani, Pashai, and Balochi. And at that time, really much was done for the development of Balochi language. For the first time, attempts were made to develop an alphabet for the Balochi language of Afghanistan. Of course, there were alphabets among the Baloch in eastern Balochistan as well, but they could not be easily accepted by the Baloch in Afghanistan, who had to learn Dari and Pashto at the same time. That's why they tried to develop an alphabet for the Balochi language, At the Academy of Sciences of Afghanistan, a department was found where these national languages were studied, and it was first of all Abdurrahman Baloch, Abdurrahman Pakhwal, who developed the alphabet and who had many Balochi publications at that time. So I can show you two examples. There was a newspaper, a weekly called Soap, in Balochi, which was published in Kabul and brought to the regions where the Balochi lived at that time. And there's an example of the Balochi alphabet project of that time, which, by the way, was developed with the help of a Soviet scholar, of a Russian scholar, who was my teacher of Balochi at the same time. During the Civil War, no policy was made with regard to Balochi language and culture, although the civil war developed on the basis of ethnic differences. During the reign of the Taliban, all ideology was Muslim or Islamistic ideology, and with regard to language, first importance was given to Pashto language. This situation changed rapidly after the fall of the Taliban. During the civil war, ethnic belonging gained in importance to such an extent in Afghanistan that in the new constitution of Afghanistan, it was even regarded necessary to mention the ethnic groups who live in Afghanistan. And in the corresponding article of the constitution, it is said that the nation of Afghanistan is comprised of the following ethnic groups: Pashtun, Tajik, Hazara, Uzbek, Turkmen, Baloch, as you can see, Pashai, Nuristani, Aimaq, Arab, Kyrgyz, Kızılbaş, Gujur, Brahui, and others. So what's important in this article of the constitution of Afghanistan? That the Brahui are mentioned along with the Baloch, not as a part of the Baloch. That's really interesting in a juristic text, because the Baloch and the Brahui, even in Afghanistan, never get tired to underline their unity. And when, during the last 8 years, new attempts to develop the Balochi language and to introduce Balochi language into schooling, into education, the Baloch always underlined that this Balochi language will be used both by Baloch and by Brahui. Yes, this is a slogan which was at one of the conferences on the Balochi language, which was held in Zaranj in Nimruz province in April 2006, when we introduced the alphabet project to the Baloch. So that's interesting. It's not easy to answer who is a Baloch. Even in Afghanistan, the question of Baloch identity is not clear, as you can see. Brahui and Baloch. So, with regard to Afghanistan, I should say that there are compact Baloch settlements in the southwestern part of Afghanistan. They are mentioned with blue color on this map. This is the northern part of Greater Balochistan, but here Baloch settled together with Pashtuns and many other groups. These are compact settlements of Baloch. Together with these compact settlements in southwestern Afghanistan, we have many Baloch splinter groups all over Afghanistan. So in southern and western Afghanistan, in the provinces of Nimruz, Farah, Badghis, Herat, and Helmand, we have these compact settlements and splinter groups we can find in Kandahar, in central regions like Zabul, Wardak, Uruzgan, even around Kabul and in the province of Ghor, we have Baloch settlements, and in northern provinces like Saripul, Balkh, Takhar, and Badakhshan. I had the chance to visit one of these Baloch splinter groups who reside in northeastern Afghanistan in the province of Takhar 1.5 years ago. And what is most interesting, I was invited by those Baloch. They heard that I am in Mazar-e-Sharif, and they invited me to visit their places in order to find out what kind of Baloch they are. So they wanted me to tell them who they are. It's a very interesting, it's a unique situation for a scholar. Usually a scholar goes somewhere and asks his own questions. And this time I was invited to answer their questions. So I will compare now identity with regard to the Baloch who reside in southwestern Afghanistan, who are very close in culture and so on, with the Baloch in western and eastern Balochistan, and on the other hand, with one of these splinter groups in northeastern Afghanistan, the Baloch of Takhar. So, identity, let me start with the following quotation. In Kabul, one young guy told to me, my classmates at Kabul University often laugh at me and ask me how I can be Baloch if I don't know Balochi language. Besides that, my classmates say that Baloch men are usually tall in stature, look around, and they reproach me for being so small. As you can see, with regard to identity, we always are confronted with certain stereotypes. But stereotypes are a part of social reality because they determine how people think about others, how they define themselves and how they define others. Theoretically speaking, identity is not a single feature. It is a cumulative and polymorph feature. So you have a pool of fragmentary characteristics. In this pool, you can have the language, the group name, culture, a shared history or shared historical memories, the customs, the way of life, religion, and many other features, like dressing, for example, yes? It is a cumulative feature, and it depends upon the situation which of these features can be regarded important and which of these features can be ignored at the same time. It depends on the situation. That is what I call this situative feature or the situation dependent feature of identity. And I will show now how this works in reality. My examples are taken from Afghanistan, but we could do the same with regard to the Baloch in western or eastern Balochistan as well. So language. As far as language is concerned, Balochi is the primary language, the first language of the Baloch who live in southwestern Afghanistan. They speak one of the Sarhadi dialects. That's why I also speak Sarhadi Balochi. I've learned among the Baloch of Afghanistan that language, but this society is a multilingual society. That means that most Baloch know at the same time Dari or Persian. Some of them may know Pashto as well. And on the other hand, on the other side, many representatives of other ethnic groups also know Balochi quite well. I met a young guy in Nimruz who worked at the local radio station as a speaker. He was Pashtun, but his Balochi was so good that he could work as a speaker at the local radio station. That is a typical situation among the Baloch in southwestern Afghanistan. And new attempts of language planning were undertaken since 2003. That means after the fall of the Taliban. A dictionary of the Balochi language was published. This dictionary was written by Abdurrahman Pakhwal, who unfortunately died in 2003. He couldn't publish the dictionary himself, and it was me, together with some Balochi intellectuals, who published the dictionary in 2007. And the publication of that dictionary, which represents the Balochi language of the Baloch of Afghanistan. That's why translations are given both in Dari and in Pashto, and I've added English translations as well. The publication of that dictionary gave rise to a national movement of the Baloch of Afghanistan. At that time, for the first time in their history, they organized a cultural association, which at that time was called the Caravan of Balochi Language, a quite romantic name. I will come back to this organization later on. So that's about the linguistic situation in southwestern Afghanistan. situation is completely different among the Baloch splinter groups in other parts of Afghanistan. Many of them speak Persian, some of them speak Uzbek or even Pashto as their primary language. As far as the Baloch of Takhar are concerned, where I have been, they speak Persian, or Farsi as they call it, and they say themselves that our ancestors have given up Balochi and switched to the local language. And this claim says that they regard the missing knowledge of Balochi as a deficit. If they would have given up the Balochi language, as a linguist, I was interested to find some Balochi substrata in their language. So there must be at least some words, some expressions in their language. So I've checked all the terminology, the kinship terminology, the terminology connected with farming and sheep holding and so on, stock farming. Not a single Balochi word or expression I could find. So I suggest that they have never spoken Balochi at all. There's no Balochi substratum in their language. Another feature which we can compare is the common cultural history, memory of the Baloch. As you know, there's a genealogical tradition according to which Mir Hamza was the grandfather of all Baloch, and then later on they moved from the west to the eastern side. You all know these stories related with Mir Jalal Khan and Mir Chakar and so on, when the Baloch were divided into 44 bolaks or tribes. This epic tradition is kept in epic songs which are sung with an instrument called suros, and this tradition is quite lively among the Baloch in southwestern Afghanistan. This is Zahir Baloch, a very famous singer and performer of these epic songs. So every Baloch in southwestern Afghanistan knows who is Mir Chakar. He may not know the whole epic tradition, but he will know the story behind that. Situation is completely different among the Baloch of Takhar. They have no knowledge of the epic tradition of the Baloch until recently. They recently found some information in the internet, and then they started to learn who was Mir Chakar and how the Baloch came from Aleppo to Balochistan and so on. And they have no knowledge of their own history. They do not know how it happened that they migrated to northeastern Afghanistan. They never know the time, they never know where their original homeland was. So I've never met groups without historical memory. I found them in Takhar. They only know that first they settled in Kashm, in Badakhshan, that later on they migrated from Badakhshan to Takhar and so on. What they usually say is that our grandfathers came here and we were made here. That's how they express it. So another feature is the tribal belonging. We've heard about the tribal structure of the Baloch, and I can agree that the tribal structure of the Baloch is still very lively in southwestern Afghanistan. They all know which tribe they belong to. There are the same tribal names as you can find in eastern Balochistan and in western Balochistan. That's why I would say that the Balochi tribes are pluri-local. You can find Rakhshani or Rind or others everywhere in every part of Balochistan. The Baloch in southwestern Afghanistan have fragmentary genealogical knowledge, and they maintain close cross-border ties. They even marry across the border to Iran in order to make those tribal ties very lively. Most important are, in everyday life, what the Baloch would call themselves pisrand. In ethnology, we would call it clans. That these are groups where the common ancestor lived 6 or 7 generations ago, and every link is known. Every member of a clan knows his ancestors of these 6, 7 or 7 generations. Situation is completely different, again, among the Baloch of Takhar. They have no tribal division. They do not know which Baloch tribe they would belong to, and they have no clans, no genealogical knowledge of all, at all. There are some group names, but they are not important in everyday life. These groups have no representatives like Whitebirds or Khans or something like that. The situation is similar among the other splinter groups all over Afghanistan. So Qaumi, the tribal division, is very important in western and southern Afghanistan. But in other groups, the Baloch are only Baloch. Their Qaum, their tribe, is Baloch. There's no more tribal division. So the Baloch in southwestern Afghanistan have maintained their code of honor, Nango Mayor. I won't go into details. You know what this means, that questions of robbery and so on are solved according to the code of honor. They would never apply to the government in such cases in southwestern Afghanistan. In northern Afghanistan, the situation is completely different. When they use words like ghairat, they always talk about the past. Today, they have no ghairat. They would like to apply to the government in cases of robbery and so on, but they cannot because they have to deal with the interference of local mujahideen, of local Uzbek leaders and so on. The way of life is completely different. There are no nomads anymore today. The Baloch in southwestern Afghanistan, most of them have given up the nomadic way of life, but as long as they were nomads, they used the black tent, as you can see it all over Balochistan, Gidan. The Baloch splinter groups in northern Afghanistan know this black tent, but they know it from Pashtun neighbors. They were nomads and they used a tent which is very close from the type to the yurt or kappa, as they call it. So to make a long story short, the Baloch in Takhar told me that they were very famous for their fighting with sticks. As soon as the sticks were mentioned, they told me very long stories how one single Baloch made the whole population of an Uzbek village to flee using only one stick and so on. Yes, and that's what I thought. This could be a joining link between the Baloch of Takhar and the Baloch in southwestern Afghanistan, because the Baloch in Balochistan, in proper Balochistan, have their Lat Gwazi, and when I described that Lat Gwazi, the dancing with sticks, to the Baloch of Takhar, do you know what they said? Oh, that's not our way to dance. This is the Kandahari way to dance. So even the Lat Gwazi, the dancing with sticks, is no joining feature between these different Baloch groups in Afghanistan. So they have a common name, but they have no common language, no shared cultural memory, no common social organization. The concept of honor is completely different, the nomad dwellings were completely different, and all other customs were different. So one more joining element is that they are Sunni Muslims, but this is true for most of the population in Afghanistan. In Sistan, a Baloch who had given up the good way taught to them by their grandfathers, who doesn't speak Balochi anymore, who has no code of honor, he would be called Kafir Baloch. You know this, yes? So it was interesting to me how the Baloch of southwestern Afghanistan would regard the Baloch splinter groups. Would they also be regarded as Kafir Baloch? I don't discuss the question about the possible origin of the Baloch of Takhar. In the 1970s and in the 1980s, first contacts were made between representatives of the Baloch splinter groups in northern Afghanistan and of the Baloch of southwestern Afghanistan. At that time, in the 1970s, a Baloch representative of the parliament met some Baloch of Takhar. And he was really surprised when he learned that the Baloch of Takhar didn't know which Baloch tribe they would belong to. And he told them, "You are Gurgech." I'm sure that you are Gorgej. Do you know which tribe he belonged to? He was Gorgej himself. The same happened in the 1980s when the leader or the chief of the Afghan trade union organization, who was a Baloch, met some representatives of Takhar, of the Baloch of Takhar, and he told them, you are Rakhshani, I'm sure you are Rakhshani Baloch. So he was Rakhshani himself, you are not surprised to hear that. So to make a conclusion, at that time, contacts were made in order to strengthen the own tribe, the own Balochi tribe. It was still a tribal thinking which was dominant among the Baloch in Afghanistan until the 1980s. The situation is completely different today. Today they have another concept. As I have mentioned, a new national movement appeared in Afghanistan after the fall of the Taliban. The organization which first was organized, was founded under the name of Caravan of the Balochi language, later on changed its name into Afghanistani, Balochani, Nazumuchu, Haqqani, Difa, Kanagai, Dodo, Rabidagin, Sazmane, you understand the name. Today it is mentioned under another name. This, by the way, is Mir Ahmad Shirzi, the chief of this cultural organization of the Baloch. Today it is mentioned under a name where the word insijam, what means harmony, stability, consanity, plays a very important role. The modern name of the organization is Organization for Insijam and for the Defense of the Rights of the Baloch of Afghanistan. The Baloch, even in southwestern Afghanistan, try to suppress tribal differences. They would say, we are Baloch first of all. And I should mention that in southwestern Afghanistan, the Baloch are under the threat to become an ethnic minority. There are many Pashtuns, even in Nimruz province, what is the central part of Afghan Balochistan. Political power is held by the Pashtuns, so the governor is a Pashtun, a Persian-speaking Pashtun. He doesn't speak Pashto. He has to come in terms with the Baloch, but the Baloch are afraid that they could become a national and ethnic minority in southwestern Afghanistan. That's why today they try to suppress their tribal belonging, to be regarded as Baloch only. And that's why they regard it very useful to have all those Baloch splinter groups all over Afghanistan. In August 2008, a gathering was held in Kabul with President Hamid Karzai, where representatives from all over Afghanistan came together in Kabul and discussed the question of the Baloch. And one point which was decided at this gathering was, it's a quite utopian plan, to resettle the Baloch from all over Afghanistan, to bring all these splinter groups from northern and central Afghanistan to the southwestern parts of Afghanistan, where they would be given land free of charge and could increase the number of the Baloch population in southwestern Afghanistan. This is a quite utopian plan and no concrete measures have been undertaken until now. They say that first the Kamal Khan dam must be reconstructed in order to supply the land with irrigation water, and then they would move from northern Afghanistan to southwestern Afghanistan. So this is about the future, but even today, the Baloch of Takhar, for example, are very happy to have found their Baloch brothers in southwestern Afghanistan, because many of them are migrant workers who go to Iran. And it is not easy to go to Iran, and you must have some persons who help you to cross the border. And for the Baloch of Takhar, it became quite easy today to cross the border because they have their Baloch brothers along the frontier. So, to make a short conclusion, I would like to say, as you can see, it's not easy to answer the question, what means Baloch identity? Identities or ethnic alliances are always a matter of interests. To say it in other words, a Baloch is who is supposed to be a Baloch, for whom it is useful to be a Baloch. Thank you.